It has often been said that there is a thin line between love and hate. What can start out as a blissful romance can quickly descend into a hellish nightmare of hostility and resentment, the fiery passions that initially stoked an intense romance, capable of igniting a burning hatred that can lead to all-out emotional war. Yet the discovery of a 500-year-old manuscript suggests that divorce in medieval Germany was taken a step further, with some marital disputes escalating into outright single combat, this last resort for settling irreconcilable disagreements, taking the vow of till death do us part quite literally. But did these duels between husband and wife really take place? And if they did, just how common were they? The concept of trial by combat was nothing new, with armed duels to the death sanctioned by medieval Germanic law as a method for settling disagreements between two parties and determining guilt when a crime had been committed. The idea was simple but surprisingly effective. In cases where no reliable witnesses or tangible evidence existed, disputes could be permanently resolved through single combat, the outcome of this fight to the death determining one's innocence or guilt, as surely an omnipotent God would only favour the innocent, his invisible hand intervening in the duel to ensure that the righteous survived and emerged victorious, while the guilty fell to his opponent's sword, his lies forever exposed to the watching crowd. Although such a legal process might seem unfair and even counterproductive, it wasn't without its merits. Although it's true that trial by combat would ordinarily favour the stronger and more skilled combatant, in a society dominated by superstition, the majority were instilled from birth with a fervent and unshakable religious faith. The idea that God could and often would decide your fate was commonplace, and so even the most hardened criminal might have doubts about his chances of survival with the Creator against him. The prospect of a swift and assured violent death, often enough to persuade the guilty to confess to their crimes before combat began, or encourage disputing parties to resolve their differences peacefully. Lengthy, drawn-out, pre-fight rituals gave both sides ample opportunity to change their minds and come to an agreement before bloodshed began. However, if the dispute could still not be settled amicably, a duel to the death would commence. Strict rules governed the ensuing fight, this lengthy and detailed list of regulations determining the types of weapons and armor that could be used, and even the time of day at which the bout would take place. However, once combat began, it would not end until one of the combatants was dead or had yielded to their opponent. Surrender was interpreted as an admission of guilt, the defeated now liable to be punished with the full force of the law. However, for those who realized that they were clearly outmatched, pleading for mercy might be one's best chance at survival. Yet although anyone could be challenged to or request a trial by combat, the law did allow for the use of substitutions in certain circumstances. Women, the elderly, children, and the ill-disabled could request to be tried by a judge, and were also permitted to seek a champion to fight on their behalf. Skilled warriors could be hired to fight in place of the accuser or accused, the most successful of these able to command enormous fees for their services, their fearsome reputations often all that was needed to intimidate the opposition into settling a dispute without the need for violence. Yet despite these exemptions, it seems that some women would still find themselves with no alternative other than to take up arms in defense of their name, especially where marital disputes and divorce was concerned, the woman no longer having a husband to act as her champion and lacking the funds required to hire a fighter to stand in her place. In 1467, a German fencing master published an instruction manual which detailed various strategies and techniques a combatant could use to overcome his opponent in an armed duel. However, although the last documented case of a woman taking part in a trial by combat occurred almost 250 years before the book was written, a number of the book's illustrations clearly show a woman engaging in combat with a male opponent. The pair assumed to be a man and his wife, attempting to settle the details of a divorce. Each illustration describes a different scenario the combatants might find themselves in, with the man shown flipping the woman over and pulling her into a hole in the ground, while in others the woman is shown as victorious, placing the man in a headlock or striking him on the head with a blunt weapon. Submission seems to have been the primary objective. However, it's clear from the drawings that these contests could easily have become fatal. This remarkable glimpse into the past already matches written descriptions of how judicial duels between a man and a woman would have been conducted in the medieval era, the bouts governed by an even more detailed and elaborate set of rules to compensate for the assumed imbalance in strength and skill between the two opponents. In the interests of fairness, the wife was given several advantages. In some depictions, the man is shown with his left arm tied behind his back, forcing him to fend off the attacking woman one-handed, while in others he is shown languishing in a deep pit while the woman moves freely around him, further diminishing his ability to fight. The husband was armed with a simple club, while the wife wielded a 4 to 5 pound rock wrapped in cloth, creating a flail-like weapon that, while easy to swing, could produce a lethal force, especially if the blow made contact with the man's head. Both weapons were of equal length to ensure that neither had a range advantage. However, exactly what the goal of the fight was varies depending on the source. Some accounts suggest that the only goal was to incapacitate the opponent by whatever means necessary, while others describe the man as being unable to leave the hole, or even allow his body to touch the sides of the pit he was placed in, with some kind of scoring system governing the outcome of the duel, whereby points were awarded or detracted for each successful submission or violation of the rules. While these duels are usually depicted as somewhat crude brawls between amateurs armed with sticks and stones, occasionally swords are shown and blood is clearly drawn, suggesting that the fight may have sometimes been to the death, depending on its circumstances. Yet, even if submission was the main goal, it's easy to imagine how an armed clash between two people who loathed each other may have gotten out of hand, the emotionally charged battle escalating into an all-out war of excessive and lethal violence. However, while the precise mechanism for choosing a winner remains unclear, it's likely that there would have been multiple victory conditions. Although outright death or incapacitation may have been disturbingly common, given the fact that both combatants were striking each other with heavy, blunt objects, the duel might also have been won if the woman managed to drag the man out of his pit, or conversely if he pulled her into it. And if a scoring system was in place, the final outcome could have also been settled by a referee's decision. Yet for the surviving loser, death may still have been a possibility, with some legal codes calling for whoever was defeated to be buried alive, while others suggest cutting off the losing woman's hand or beaten man's head. It's difficult to say just how often these duels between men and women were held, but they were certainly common enough to merit the publication of legal regulations and detailed books governing their etiquette. The authors unlikely to have wasted their time devoting entire sections of their work to teaching women how to overcome male opponents, if such contests were merely a curious and rare oddity of history. Serious fencing masters included these sections in their manuals precisely because they intended women to be a part of their audience, and thus deserving of their expert advice. These well-respected men unlikely to have sullied their books with lies and sensationalism, a point further reinforced by the fact that the examples of combat between men and women are presented as ordinary and without any salaciousness. On the other hand, it's also unlikely that they were all that common, given the fact that trial by combat was generally reserved for serious criminal cases. The mere animosity between a husband and wife wishing to part ways, unlikely to have been considered urgent enough to warrant a legal duel except under extreme circumstances, thus explaining why there are so few documented real-world examples of men and women engaging in trial by combat against one another, with the last verified duel between a married couple taking place in around 1200 AD. While there's also no evidence that the man and woman depicted in the manual's illustrations were husband and wife, it's highly unlikely that any married woman would have been fighting her own duel, as her husband would have almost certainly stood in as her champion. As such, any woman partaking in trial by combat against a man would have either been unmarried and poor, or fighting against her husband in a divorce dispute, with some historians arguing that divorce by combat between a man and a woman would have actually been far more common than judicial trial by combat between a man and a woman, as in the majority of cases, the man who would normally act as her champion was now her opponent. By the late medieval period, all forms of trial by combat had disappeared into the pages of history. However, this glimpse into an unusual past demonstrates just how heated the affairs of the heart can become. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope to see you again soon.